is the Capitol Rundown.
To what happens when people do that without any accountability. There's a 6 out of 10 shot they're going to do it to an actual vulnerable person.
We then, of course, would welcome Hunter Biden to testify at a public hearing at a future date.
Well, look, anytime you think about your future, you ask, where do you belong?
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Siobhan Klepfer. A lot has happened in Michigan politics over the last week, so let's get you caught up. And we are starting today with U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg making a stop in East Lansing on Wednesday. Buttigieg was part of a speaker series hosted by Michigan State University. It's the Governor Jim Blanchard Public Service Forum, an annual event where students and faculty can hear from national and world leaders. The secretary talked to reporters about the White House's push toward electric vehicles, especially in Michigan.
There's no going back any more than we're going back to rotary phones. The question is, how quickly will it happen, and how much will it be made in the United States?
Convince them to get in the game? Sounds like they're backing out.
Well, no, they're not reversing course any more than
They're changing course.
They're adjusting their pace.
The secretary was also asked about his possible political future. Buttigieg does have a home in Traverse City, making him an official Michigander. The conversation covered whether or not he'd run for Senator Debbie Stabenow's soon-to-be open seat or governor in the next election cycle.
Well, look, anytime you think about your future, you ask, where do you belong? And I know where I belong, at the pleasure of the President of the United States, is in this cabinet working on transportation policy, trying to see through so many of the things that we started and that President Biden set in motion.
Well, yes, but you're not going to be secretary forever, are you?
No, I'm not. This is not the kind of job that you can do forever.
Okay, you're not going to retire after this.
No, and look, I don't know whether this will be the last elected or appointed job I ever have, but what I know is that my future, as well as a lot of things that are much more important than my future, depend on how I do in this job right now. And so I don't sit around thinking about others.
Then say for me, I don't want to be governor of Michigan.
I don't think about how much I want to or don't want to have jobs besides the one that I've got.
You know, there could be a good race. It could be that man from Traverse City versus that woman from Michigan in a presidential race. Ever thought about that?
No. What I will say is Michigan has a governor, and she's fantastic.
Well, coming up later, our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic will be here to tell us more about his conversation with Buttigieg. During his speech at MSU, though, protesters interrupted to get the transportation secretary's attention. They were there for multiple causes, from calling for an end to war to calling for an end to fossil fuels. And the Rundown's Josh Sanchez has the details.
Nearly 100 protesters packed the parking ramp of the Kellogg Hotel and Conference Center in East Lansing. Pro-Palestinian signs were held high, flags were carried along with banners draped over the side of the building calling for the end of U.S. aid to Israel. The crowd of students and parents with kids grew ahead of a visit to MSU by Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who was there as part of a speaker series, but was met by protesters who wanted him to take demands of a ceasefire back to Washington.
The opportunity that he came here gave us a perfect opportunity to add pressure, protest, picket, and get our message across. And I'm sure he's hearing us, I'm sure he's seen us, you know, and it's gonna go up there.
Inside the Kellogg Center, Secretary Buttigieg took to the stage to reflect on his political rise and talk about the future of our country's infrastructure. But his speech was soon interrupted by protesters from the group Climate Defiance. Secretary Buttigieg brushed off the incident and used it as a way to tout the Biden administration's climate policy.
I think it'd be weird to be in the middle of a speech about democracy and not at least acknowledge the concern of demonstrators who's going on. We care deeply about climate change, which is why our administration has delivered the most sweeping and ambitious climate legislation passed in human history.
As he ended the night with a discussion with former state governor Jim Blanchard, pro-Palestinian protesters could be seen and heard just outside of the ballroom. That same crowd clashed with one person who was in attendance for the speech.
Story. Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
The same calls for a ceasefire went on through the end of the night, ending just how it started.
Josh Sanchez, thank you. Meanwhile, Governor Gretchen Whitmer was also thinking about green energy technology when she signed a package of bills into law on Wednesday. The law requires Michigan to reach 100% clean energy by the year 2040, and it includes language to speed up the permitting process for wind and solar projects.
Today I'm going to sign 7 game-changing bills that are going to lower household energy costs by an average of $145 a year, improve reliability, and create 160,000 good-paying jobs.
However, Republican State Representative Andrew Beeler says the law will actually make energy bills more expensive. He says utility customers will pay a collective $200 million more. But the advocacy group Evergreen Action says costs will actually decrease. Well, coming up next on the Capitol Rundown, state lawmakers are talking about animals, specifically legislation that could create a database of animal abusers. We'll explain after the break. Welcome back. In Lansing, Speaker of the House Joe Tate put a proposal on the 2024 agenda that would create a statewide animal abuse registry to prevent abusers from owning more pets. And the idea comes with bipartisan support. The Senate's Democratic leader, State Senator Winnie Brink, supports the idea. Across the aisle, Republican State Senator Eric Nesbitt and Republican State Representative Matt Hall are also backing it. It's an idea championed by Genesee County Sheriff Chris Swanson.
You directly connect animal abuse, neglect, and torture to what happens when people do that without any accountability. There's a 6 out of 10 shot they're going to do it to an actual vulnerable person, a child.
Swanson's name has come up among pundits while talking about various openings in elected positions in the near future. Swanson says he will not run to replace Congressman Dan Kildee, who is not seeking re-election, but he has not said no to someday running for governor. Well, as you saw earlier in the show, our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic had a wide-ranging conversation with U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg on Wednesday. He talked to the Rundown's Jorma Duran about that conversation, as well as clean energy laws here in Michigan.
It's time to get updated politically here in the state of Michigan, and nobody better than this guy right here, Tim Skubic, to help us out. Tim, you sat down with the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg during his visit to East Lansing. What did you find out about in terms of transportation policies from the Biden administration that are impacting Michigan?
Yeah, good question, Jorma, and nice to be with you. Look, the Secretary is on the front line of trying to convince Americans that they should be buying EVs, electrical vehicles. And in our cross-examination of the good Secretary, we basically established the fact that he is holding fast to the Biden policy, which is they want 50% of the motoring fleet motorists across the country to have EVs by the end of this decade. What do you think of that?
It sounds like a great plan, but how close are we here in the state of Michigan to accomplishing that?
Well, it's more than a half a mile, believe me. We're at about 12%, 13% of the motoring fleet in our state. So motorists are not signing up. And as I shared with the Secretary, the data here as to who's buying these EVs, Jorma, are very critical. 87% of them are white people buying these cars. 57% are those earning over $100,000 a year. And here's a key demographic. Those between the ages of 57 and 75 are least likely to buy an EV. Now, the Secretary says, you know what, older people are always late to the party, but he's still optimistic. So we'll go from there.
Earlier in the show, we heard about Governor Whitmer signing a package of bills on clean energy and the Republican response, but where do Michigan voters stand on the topic?
You know, it's one thing to say we should have clean energy. It's another thing to get people to do what's necessary to get there. And of course, the bottom line here is eventually the utilities are going to have a huge infrastructure cost. And guess who's going to pay that? It'll probably be in a rate increase. So there's lots of fishhooks in this story. On the surface, it sounds like a good one, but getting there may be a long slog.
Yeah, you could say that again. Tim, always great to see you and hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jorm. Catch you later.
And thank you to you both. A package of bills focused on regulating artificial intelligence in political ads is sitting on Governor Gretchen Whitmer's desk waiting for her signature. The Rundown's Rachel Ramsey has the details on how this will affect future campaign seasons.
These bills are going to go a long way in protecting voters from misinformation.
The bills will be law soon, so how will they work? They'll require the disclosure of the use of AI and manipulated media in political campaigns.
You might use AI to kind of improve, like upon some of your campaign videos or campaign imagery. But if you're doing that, we're just asking that you include a disclaimer that says that it's AI generated.
The sponsor of the bills, Democrat Penelope Cernoglu, says deepfakes take things to another level and require a more in-depth disclaimer.
Deepfake, for example, is if I'm making a video of my opponent, but it's not really my opponent. It just looks like my opponent, and I have him or her saying things that they did not say or doing things that they did not do. But you have to have a disclaimer on a deepfake that not only says it's AI generated, but it also says that it's materially deceptive.
If AI is not disclosed in a political ad, it could mean up to 93 days in jail for anyone who produces that kind of content, or be fined up to $1,000. As this type of legislation is pushed on the federal levels as well, Cernoglu says it's also needed on a state level. She discussed what she hopes the bills will do if signed into law.
Continue to preserve the integrity of our elections and protect our democracy and our voters from misinformation. And it will just make everyone more confident in the security of our elections.
In Lansing, Rachel Ramsey, Capitol Rundown.
Coming up, there are changes in the races for Michigan's delegation on Capitol Hill. Retirements, campaigns ended, and campaigns announced. That and much more next. Welcome back. On Monday, State Board of Education Director Pamela Pugh dropped her bid for the U.S. Senate seat that will be left open by retiring Senator Debbie Stabenow. And she announced that she is now running for the seat that will be left open by Congressman Dan Kildee, who is not going to run for re-election. She says her decision to seek federal office is rooted in two goals: to make sure communities have a strong, capable, and experienced voice in Washington, and to add more women to the ranks of power. Well, speaking of Washington, the House voted on Friday to kick embattled New York Congressman George Santos out of office. But despite that, Santos said before the vote that he did not plan to run for re-election. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Trevor Shirley has more.
Congressman Santos is now only the sixth member of Congress ever expelled. He's facing allegations that he fleeced his constituents and donors, spending thousands of campaign dollars on personal expenses like rent and shopping trips. He's also facing indictment by the Justice Department and has pleaded not guilty. Despite a scathing ethics committee report released last week, Santos refused to resign. He says this is a political stunt by people who don't like him.
It's pretty frustrating because I'm sitting here as somebody who is fighting an enormous amount of allegations, but I'm still fighting, I'm still standing, but they're all counting me out for dead, and I can't change that.
I think with overwhelming support, the House has affirmed a standard of conduct, and we have decided, after a due process, comprehensive ethics report, that George Santos fell far short of the standards we wish to uphold and is no longer a member of Congress.
Well, coming up next on the Capitol Rundown, Republicans in Congress are still pushing to impeach President Joe Biden, and now Hunter Biden is calling the GOP's bluff when it comes to testifying. We'll have those details next. The impeachment inquiry into President Biden is moving forward in Congress. The Republicans behind that effort laid out their next steps, including a plan to have the president's son, Hunter Biden, testify. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent Hannah Brandt tells us what's next.
Republicans launched an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden more than 2 months ago.
You don't rush something like this. You can't.
Now they're saying they're digging deeper into allegations that the president profited from unethical business dealings.
Joe Biden has repeatedly lied to the American people about his family's corrupt influence peddling schemes.
Over the next 2 months, House Oversight Chairman James Comer says his committee plans to interview new key witnesses. They've subpoenaed several people, including Hunter Biden, and his lawyers say he'll testify publicly, but not behind closed doors. But Republicans say they want him to sit with the committee for a private deposition first.
We then, of course, would welcome Hunter Biden to testify at a public hearing at a future date.
All along, Democrats have defended President Biden, calling this investigation baseless and a waste of time.
Republicans can't point to a single shred of evidence implicating President Biden. That's why it's a slow start. There is no evidence.
Congressman Pete Aguilar accuses Republicans of playing political games and says they're just seeking revenge for the Trump impeachments.
Donald Trump is the leader of their party, and this is yet another attempt to make him happy.
But Republicans argue they've uncovered concrete evidence of corruption, and they say it's their duty to keep looking into this.
That's what needs to happen so the American people get the facts, get the truth.
And House Speaker Mike Johnson claims there's more to come.
I think you're going to see a lot more developments over that in the days ahead.
In Washington, I'm Hannah Brandt.
Coming up, in New York State, Governor Gretchen Whitmer's sister wanted to be the next representative for her district in Washington. We'll tell you why that is not going to happen now. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Governor Gretchen Whitmer's sister, who was running to represent New York's 17th congressional district in Washington, D.C., suspended her campaign on Wednesday. Liz Whitmer-Garrity says she's supporting fellow Democrat Mondaire Jones in the race to unseat incumbent Republican Congressman Mike Lawler next year. Whitmer-Garrity is a former member of a school board in New York's Hudson Valley. In a statement announcing the suspension of her campaign, she says in recent months she found her voice to speak on issues that affect people's lives. And finally today, the Supreme Court announced on Friday that former Justice Sandra Day O'Connor died at the age of 93. She was the first female justice on the court, having been appointed by President Ronald Reagan in 1981. She retired in 2006. In a statement, Chief Justice John Roberts said of his former colleague, a daughter of the American Southwest, Sandra Day O'Connor blazed a historic trail as our nation's first female justice. She met that challenge with undaunted determination, indisputable ability, and engaging candor. During her 24-year tenure on the High Court, she was often at its center and was a critical swing vote in divisive cases, including those involving abortion and affirmative action. After she left the court, Justice O'Connor founded the organization called iCivics, a civics education platform. The Supreme Court says plans for her funeral will be released when they are available. If you're interested in getting more political news from Michigan and Washington, we've got just the thing for you. You can sign up for our Capitol Rundown newsletter. It's just one email each week, and you can get it by pointing your cell phone camera at the screen right now. This will take you to the sign up page, or head to WLNS.com/newsletter. And that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown. We'll see you again right here next week.